Welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube. Today we're covering West Coast's final hit out before the Premiership season begins, which took place at Hands Oval in Bunbury in front of a crowd of 8,000. And that will increase to 13,000 when the Kangaroos return to host their two agreed matches in WA against West Coast and Fremantle. So I'm assuming that will involve a lot of temporary seating, similar to what you see at concerts or some sports with alternate field dimensions. I have seen it at rugby games. But right off the bat, just to start us off, I can think of a couple of headlines from the match. Number one, and it's kind of relevant to the stadium and the seating, Hands Oval is very vulnerable to wind. And I know that it's not your typical stadium, and there's a bit of an exhibition element to this. But I, watching it yesterday, can't remember a footy game so visibly impacted by wind since the 90s. A lot of field passes over 50 metres just were stopping dead in the air towards the end of their flight and just dropping short. And the carry on the ball was enormous going back the other way. To give a bit of context, I'm not sure if anyone's seen the highlight yet, but at the end of the game, towards the end of the game, Liam Baker absolutely flushed a goal from 60 metres out that split the middle and ended up carrying about 70 metres in total once it went beyond the goal. Anyway, hopefully the temporary seating that they put in for the stadium does a little to block some of that wind once the sides return to Hands Oval this year, just when premiership points are involved. Otherwise, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people turning around saying that, look, it's a rain, hail or shine style game that we play AFL, but that just stood out for me quite a lot. So, hopefully that does make a little bit of a difference. The second headline is that I didn't realise the holding the ball rule has tightened up this year until I saw it in practice during this match. From what I could tell, the rule seemed to be that if anyone was held in the tackle for too long, it was holding the ball. Personally, I didn't think too much of it had to do with prior opportunity, or I'm sure that's how they'll describe it in the rules. And I couldn't really make much sense of it when I was looking at it. Was consistently applied, but I couldn't make much sense of it when I was trying to figure out what the rule was. Basically, though, my thoughts on it is that if it is applied consistently throughout the year, then defenders are going to have to be very careful taking possession of the ball in congestion. Otherwise, we're just going to see a lot of shots on goal instead of stoppages inside 50. And that's kind of fine for the scores of the game, but I am a little bit dubious about shots on goal coming from something because, controversial as someone having the ball in their hands when they're tackled and that being all there is to it. But just watch that space because that was just an observation I made. Now to the best players out there. I'm going to have to clarify before I get into these that I know player stats are now available. I'm sure everyone's going to pull them up now that I've mentioned that. But my advice to anybody who didn't watch the game is don't bother looking them up. West Coast had significantly less of the football than North Melbourne, which is something I'll discuss separately in the key takeaways at the end of this video. However, individually, players didn't have the same time on ground as a normal match. I'm pretty sure there was a complete turnover of some players at halftime, which did include my current favourite, Tyrell Dewar, coming in the second half and having quite a big impact. So we'll start off with that. I'm very pleased to say, once again, Dewar was in my best players, again, this hit out. And I personally think you would be absolutely nuts at this stage not to start him on the wing in round one in a fortnight from now. By the time he was on the field, I'd almost forgotten about him just because of the fact that they weren't really rotating from what I could tell. He just was held off the field until halftime. And then he suddenly just started setting up huge plays along the wing just to inside 50. There was one play, I think he got it back like 3 times. And his run and carry as well as his disposal was elite. So having him on the field really did open the game up. And yes, while I did mention Dewar first, that was just kind of preferences. The best player on the ground, by the way, was by far Jake Waterman. He was out there by far best player by quite a lot. He was actually the only reason I think we even won a game that we didn't have control of. Pretty much every clean inside 50 ended up in his hands, and he did end up with 4 goals won, so the accuracy was there too. Liam Baker was also really damaging for us. He's probably second best player, I'd say. He's got a really impressive ability, and I know I mentioned this during my videos on players to watch in 2025, but he's got a really impressive ability to involve himself when the momentum is going the other way. And he just got the ball moving for West Coast when it looked like North was in control of everything. So I think we're going to really love that about Liam Baker, once the season kicks off, is that he really does just will himself into games when things aren't looking great. On that note, Jack Graham did most of the heavy lifting in the midfield, and the midfield looked really flat, so it really did fall on his shoulders. Wasn't an excellent game, but when you look at the load that was carried, it was more important just how much he involved himself. Most of North Melbourne's dominance across the four quarters started there, and Jack Graham was just in there the whole time trying to wrestle that away from them. He laid some huge tackles, and he was just getting some really badly needed contested possessions. So another one in the bests for that reason. Wasn't particularly neat or classy, but it was very necessary. And then the last one in the best was Ruben Jinby. I think he's going to have a breakout year this year. His attacking and taking territory with every possession really suits his strengths, playing off halfback now. And I think his metres gained is going to be a stat that's worth watching this year. So I couldn't find it on the app. I was curious about it, but once the premiership season kicks off, pay attention to that stat when it comes to Ruben Jinby. Other than that, the players who were exciting included Beau Allen. He was actually one of our better players early. He just does a lot of damage with every possession, and he's one of the best ball carriers in our side. I know it's good coaching to build first-year players off half-back, but all I think when I see him play is how badly I want to see that guy in the midfield. He's got it written all over him, inside mid, line breaker, all of it. So he was exciting, and you could almost say he was in the best, but he just didn't really get a hell of a lot of it towards the end, and I wasn't tracking it too well, but he might have been off. I don't think he was. That's the ebbs and flows of these scratch matches that happens. Tyler Brockman still looks really dangerous, and he also started to match that real X factor that he's got with the ball by actually getting a lot more of it. In a forward line with so much competition for spots at the moment, I'm putting him right at the top of the list to be starting in round one as well. So, yes, this is the final preseason video, and I'm sort of throwing out all my big calls now. Doesn't mean I'll get them all right, but I thought Brockman did enough to be in that. And the same goes for Liam Ryan. He looks like he's getting back to his best football. He kicked 2, and he did some really good things around the ground. Not prolific, but these deep high forwards, especially under McWalter's game style, you can't really measure their stats around the ground the way that you used to. Jack Hutchinson was still showing that level of intensity that stands out, I think, even at AFL level. I actually can't remember a guy who's just always in fifth gear in every contest like him. I'd be really keen to actually hear from anyone watching this video if you can think of someone who was just always just that high intensity player. And I hope you sort of understand what I say when I talk about Jack Hutchinson, because it's a very unique look, just the way he's just at everything like a dog with a bone. I think he's also done enough to lock down a spot in the round one side. I do think that Tyrell Dewar and Jaden Hunt are likely to be that starting wing, and I know that's where he's also been placed, but he's very versatile, and I think he's earned himself a spot as well. And then lastly, I think out of the exciting players, Matt Owies did a lot of really handy things throughout the game. So, yeah, that small forward squeeze for spots is very real this year. And I think he's another one of the guys that's really increasing the squeeze that there is for those spots. So be very tight, because I can think of a lot of really good guys outside of the 3 that I just mentioned that are also guys that I would always have called walk-in starters any other year. That's it for the best and exciting players, which leaves us with my key takeaways for the day. First key takeaway was on squad selection. So it's a little bit sort of before the game, but it's worth really measuring against what we saw in the performance today. When I looked at the squad, which included an 8-man bench being the preseason, so that came out on Friday, I was surprised to see how senior the side was. I guess that, being the last hit out before the premiership season, the development stuff has to take a backseat to the readiness, and that's what appeared the selection was aiming for. I thought it was a bit strange to see Petruccelli dropped on the back of 4 goals in the intra-club last weekend. Again, that's that forward line squeeze, and I'm not saying that I think Petruccelli is going to be starting in round 1, even if it wasn't for today. I'm just off the back of the 4 goals he kicked in the intra-club, I would have thought that he'd be out there again, putting his hand up at least to compete for it this weekend, but he wasn't. I was also disappointed to see Clay Hall wasn't out there. I think that's just because I prefer to see the younger guys play during the preseason. And the same goes for Elijah Hewitt, which wasn't even about selection. He just was kept out with soreness. I think quite likely off the back of playing 2 games over 5 days after all the time out that he's had. So I expect that there's nothing really wrong there. Seeing Archer Reed in because Oscar Allen was at a wedding was kind of a win, just on my sort of young player sort of policy, because it's another young guy who's just replacing a star who's not even injured, which is a really good thing. But what was more telling about that, however, is that it looks like Archer Reed may be in favour ahead of Jack Williams for that third tall forward spot that also pinch hits in the ruck. Or at the very least, it shows that he's in competition for that spot, which is interesting in his second year, especially I think after Jack Williams' performance over the last few years. That's all for, I suppose, the selection takeaway. My other key takeaway was that for our final hit out before the official season begins, West Coast, they really didn't actually look like a well-oiled machine out there. And I know I said the exact opposite against Richmond, which was probably even less structured. But yeah, it was a little bit telling that the scoreboard probably didn't match the way that the game was played. And I know we won, but the midfield against North Melbourne was particularly underperforming, excluding Jack Graham. And it appeared that the aim for the hit out was to put forward a fairly senior team, like I mentioned, and it just didn't seem like the result on the field yielded the result that that selection speaks to. Yes, like I said, I know the scoreboard says we won, and there were a lot of good individual performances, which I mentioned, but I just felt like, unlike the Richmond scratch match, it wasn't an even performance across the ground. A lot of players outside the ones I mentioned didn't really contribute, and if it wasn't for Jake Waterman, that scoreboard would have reflected that. As always, however, it's important to never really read too deeply into preseason games. The wind made it a bit ugly, which really emphasises the need for contested possessions, which is not quite, I think, what West Coast is going to be about under McWalter. And it's also a very easy fix to balance the midfield over the next couple of weeks. And the new game style that West Coast are playing this year, it's going to be about hitting the scoreboard quickly, which is what we did. And it's also the complete opposite to the possession style game that North Melbourne played yesterday. So between the two, it's kind of a perfect storm for control of the match to look bad. But anyway, that's about all from the preseason. So thank you for tuning in. As always, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel on YouTube if you haven't already. And then I'll see you all in round 1. Until then,